The gunshots echoing through the dusty streets of Silver Creek sent Faith Millington running for her life, her heart pounding against her ribcage like a wild Mustang. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and she had never imagined her 21st birthday would end with her fleeing through the darkness, the hem of her once fine dress now torn and caked with mud. Faith ducked behind a water trough, gasping for breath as she peered around the corner of the general store. The men who had attacked the stagecoach, killing the driver and the other passengers, were still searching for her, their lanterns casting eerie shadows as they moved methodically through the small frontier town. "Check the alley," a gruff voice commanded. "That girl's worth $500 to the boss, dead or alive." Faith's blood ran cold. She had no idea why anyone would put a bounty on her head. 3 days ago, she had been safely tucked away at Miss Porter's school for young ladies in Boston, preparing to become a teacher. Now her escort was dead, her belongings stolen, and strangers were hunting her through an unfamiliar town in the middle of nowhere. A dog barked nearby, and Faith knew she couldn't stay hidden much longer. Gathering what remained of her courage, she slipped between buildings, keeping to the shadows as she made her way toward the edge of town. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of what appeared to be a barn rising against the star-filled sky. If she could reach it, perhaps she could hide until morning. Her lungs burned as she ran, stumbling over rocks and brush. The sound of horses' hooves spurred her onward, and when she finally reached the weathered structure, she nearly sobbed with relief. Faith pulled at the heavy door, slipping inside just as riders appeared on the road behind her. The interior was dark and smelled of hay and livestock. Faith crouched behind some barrels, her entire body trembling as she heard the riders approach. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the terrible predicament she was in, alone, hunted, and hundreds of miles from anyone who knew her name. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, "have mercy." The barn door creaked open, and Faith pressed herself further into the shadows, covering her mouth to stifle her sobs. Heavy boots crossed the threshold, and a lantern's glow illuminated the space. "I know someone's in here," a deep voice called out. Not rough like the men who'd been chasing her, but firm and clear. "I saw you run in. Show yourself." Faith remained frozen, terror rendering her mute. The light moved closer, and suddenly, she was staring up at the tall figure of a man in a wide-brimmed hat. His face was partially shadowed, but she could see the glint of his eyes as he studied her. "What are you doing in my barn, miss?" Before Faith could answer, the sound of approaching riders grew louder. The man's expression changed as he glanced toward the door, then back at her huddled form. "They're after you?" Faith nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "I don't know why they want me. I need mercy." The man studied her for what felt like an eternity before extinguishing his lantern. In the sudden darkness, she felt him move closer, his voice a low murmur near her ear. "You've got mine forever, miss. Stay hidden." He moved away just as several riders pulled up outside. Faith curled into herself, trying to become invisible as the barn door swung open once more. "Evening, Cole," one of the riders called out. "Seen a young woman running this way? Dark hair, blue dress?" "Can't say that I have," the man called Cole replied, his tone casual. "Been in the house all evening until I heard you fellows riding in." "Something wrong." "Escaped prisoner," came the quick lie. "Dangerous one, too. You sure you haven't seen anything?" "This is the only road to my ranch. If someone came this way, I'd have noticed." There was a moment of silence, and Faith could practically feel the tension in the air. "Mind if we take a look around your barn?" the rider asked. "Actually, I do mind," Cole replied, his voice hardening. "My property, my rules. Unless you've got a warrant, you best be on your way." "You making trouble, Owens?" "Just stating facts. This is my land. That badge doesn't give you the right to trespass without cause." Another tense silence followed, broken only by the nervous shuffling of horses. "We'll be back if we find out you're lying," the rider finally said. "I'll be here," Cole answered evenly. Faith hardly dared to breathe as the riders turned and departed, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Only when silence had fallen once more did she let out a shuddering breath. The lantern flared to life again, and Faith found herself looking into the face of her savior. Cole Owens was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with keen blue eyes and a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. His expression was guarded as he extended a hand to help her up. "Thank you," Faith whispered, accepting his assistance. Her legs felt unsteady as she rose to her feet. "Those weren't lawmen," Cole said, his gaze moving to the door. "I recognized their leader, Marcus Webb. He's a hired gun for the Chandler Mining Company." "I don't understand," Faith said, swaying slightly. "I've never heard of Chandler Mining. I only arrived in Arizona territory today." Cole's brow furrowed. "Where were you headed?" "Clearwater. I'm to be the new schoolteacher there." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "Clearwater's been having trouble with Chandler. The company's trying to force the townspeople off their land. There's silver in those hills." He paused, studying her. "You're the replacement for Miss Holloway?" Faith nodded. "The school board wrote to my institution in Boston. They said the previous teacher had to leave suddenly due to a family emergency." "That's one way of putting it," Cole said grimly. "Rebecca Holloway was found dead 2 weeks ago. Most folks believe Chandler's men were responsible, though nothing was ever proven." Faith felt the blood drain from her face. "Dead? But why would they?" She was organizing the townspeople, helping them fight the mining company's claims. Cole's expression softened slightly at Faith's obvious distress. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this." Faith sank down onto a nearby hay bale, her mind reeling. "And now they think I'm here to do the same thing." "Likely so." Cole moved to the barn door, peering out into the darkness. "They won't give up easily. Webb's not known for leaving witnesses." "What am I going to do?" Faith whispered, the full weight of her situation crashing down on her. "I don't even know where Clearwater is from here." Cole was silent for a moment, his tall frame silhouetted against the lantern light. "It's about 2 days' ride northwest of here. But you can't go there now, they'll be watching the roads." "I have nowhere else to go," Faith said, her voice breaking. Cole turned to face her, decision evident in his stance. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." He gestured toward the door. "My house is just up the path. It's not much, but it's safer than this barn." Faith hesitated. Everything she'd been taught warned against accepting such an offer from a stranger, a man living alone in the wilderness. Yet what choice did she have? "I'm Faith Millington," she said finally, rising to her feet. "And I'm very grateful for your help, Mr. Owens." "Cole," he corrected, offering a brief nod. "Come on, Miss Millington. You look like you could use a hot meal and some rest." The house was indeed modest, a 2-room cabin with sturdy walls and a stone fireplace. Inside was surprisingly tidy, with simple but well-made furniture and shelves lined with books. Cole stoked the fire while Faith stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure of her place in this unexpected sanctuary. "Sit," Cole said, gesturing to a chair at the small table. "I'll heat up some stew." Faith obeyed, sinking gratefully into the chair. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she became aware of her disheveled appearance. Her once fine traveling dress was torn and dirty, her hair falling from its pins. She attempted to smooth it back into place, suddenly self-conscious under Cole's brief glances. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, hoping conversation might ease the awkward silence. 7 years, Cole replied, placing a pot on the stove. "Came west after the war. Wanted open space and quiet." "You fought in the war between the states." He nodded. "Union Army. Was just a boy when I enlisted. 17 years old, and thought I knew everything. A shadow passed over his features. Learned differently pretty quick. Faith watched as he efficiently moved around the small kitchen. There was a deliberateness to his movements, an economy of motion that suggested a man accustomed to solitude. "What do you raise here?" she asked. "Horses mainly. Got a small herd of cattle too, but they're mostly for my own use." He ladled stew into a bowl and placed it before her, along with a chunk of bread. "It's not fancy, but it's filling." "Thank you," Faith said, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. The stew was surprisingly good, rich, with vegetables and tender meat. She ate gratefully, while Cole poured them both cups of coffee. "So, Boston," he said, sitting across from her. "That's a long way from Arizona territory." Faith nodded. "I've never been west of Philadelphia before. Everything here is so." She gestured vaguely. "Vast." "Takes some getting used to," Cole agreed. "What made you decide to come teach in a frontier town?" Faith stared into her coffee cup. "I wanted to make a difference. In Boston, there are dozens of qualified teachers for every position. Out here, I thought I could truly be needed." She gave a humorless laugh. "I never imagined I'd be risking my life for it." "Chandler mining doesn't play by any rules," Cole said. "They've bought off half the territorial officials and scared off the rest. Clearwater's one of the last towns standing in their way. And now they think I'm here to help the resistance," Faith said, setting down her spoon. "But I'm just a teacher. I don't know the first thing about fighting mining companies or land claims." Cole studied her thoughtfully. "Maybe that doesn't matter. Just your willingness to come here might be enough to make you a target. Especially after what happened to Miss Holloway." "What will happen to Clearwater if they don't get a teacher?" Faith asked. "The school might close. And without a school, families will start leaving." Cole's expression hardened. "Which is exactly what Chandler wants, to empty the town so they can take the land." Faith felt a surge of indignation. "That's despicable." "That's business out here," Cole replied, though his tone suggested he shared her sentiment. They fell silent as Faith finished her meal, the gravity of her situation settling over her once more. When she stifled a yawn, Cole rose from the table. "You can take the bed," he said, nodding toward the doorway that led to the second room. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." Faith shook her head. "I couldn't possibly. You've had a harder day than most people have in a lifetime, Miss Millington. Take the bed. There's a basin of water and some clean towels if you want to wash up." Too exhausted to argue further, Faith thanked him and retreated to the small bedroom. It was as neat as the rest of the house, with a solid wooden bed covered in a handmade quilt. She washed her face and hands, then hesitated over her filthy dress. After a moment's deliberation, she removed it, keeping on her chemise and petticoat as she slipped under the covers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the men who had attacked the stagecoach, heard the gunshots that had killed people she'd only just met. And beneath it all was the unsettling realization that she, Faith Millington of Boston, Massachusetts, was now being hunted by killers in a territory where she knew no one. No one except the quiet cowboy who had, for reasons she couldn't fathom, decided to protect her. Morning arrived with the crowing of a rooster, and Faith opened her eyes to unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, panic seized her, until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was in Cole Owens' cabin, having narrowly escaped men who wanted her dead. She found her dress draped over a chair, still dirty, but somewhat less rumpled than it had been. With no other options, she put it back on, doing her best to make herself presentable before venturing into the main room. Cole was already up, frying bacon on the stove. He glanced up as she entered, nodding a greeting. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I expected to," Faith admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Cole shrugged off her thanks, sliding bacon onto a plate alongside some fried potatoes. thought about your situation, he said as they sat down to eat. Got an idea, but you might not like it. At this point, I'm open to any suggestions, Faith said. Cole took a sip of coffee, seemingly gathering his thoughts. I've got a friend in Clearwater, Samuel Turner. He runs the general store and sits on the town council. If anyone knows what's really happening there, it's Sam. He set down his cup. I could take you to him. He might be able to help figure out how to get you safely established as the teacher. Faith felt a surge of hope. You do that. Chandler's men have been causing trouble for everyone in these parts, Cole said. And he hesitated. It's not right, what they're trying to do to you and to Clearwater. Faith studied him, trying to understand this man who had so readily come to her aid. It would be dangerous for you too, wouldn't it? I can handle myself, he said simply. But we need to be careful. Take the back trails, avoid the main roads. How long would the journey take? 3 days, maybe 4. Longer than the direct route, but safer. Faith considered this. 3 days alone with a man she barely knew, traveling through wilderness she couldn't begin to navigate on her own. It was wildly improper by every standard she'd been raised with. Yet the alternative was to remain here, a fugitive with no clear path forward. When would we leave? She asked finally. Tomorrow at dawn, Cole replied. Today, we need to get you some proper traveling clothes and supplies. That dress won't last a day on the trail. Faith glanced down at her ruined garment. I don't have any money. Everything I owned was in my trunk on the stagecoach. I've got some things that might work. My sister stayed here a few years back. Left some clothes behind. After breakfast, Cole brought out a trunk from a storage shed. Inside were several practical garments, split skirts for riding, sturdy blouses, and a serviceable jacket. Martha was about your size, Cole explained, leaving Faith to sort through the clothing. She moved to California with her husband. Said she wouldn't need frontier clothes in San Francisco. Faith selected the items that seemed most suitable for their journey, grateful for the unexpected providence. When Cole left to tend to his horses, she changed quickly, marveling at how much more comfortable the simpler garments were compared to her fashionable Boston attire. She spent the rest of the day helping Cole prepare for their departure, packing provisions, studying the maps he spread across the table, and listening carefully to his instructions about what to expect on the trail. As the sun began to set, a new worry gnawed at her. What if those men come back tonight? She asked as they sat down to supper. They won't, Cole said with quiet confidence. They'll have moved on to check other farms and ranches. They can't afford to focus too much attention on one place. It would raise suspicions. How did you know they weren't really lawmen? Faith asked, curious about his immediate distrust. Cole's expression darkened. Real lawmen identify themselves properly. And they don't hunt women in the middle of the night. He hesitated. Besides, I recognized one of them. He's done Chandler's dirty work before. Faith sensed there was more to the story, but Cole's tone discouraged further questioning. Instead, she asked about their route to Clearwater, and he seemed relieved by the change of subject. That night, despite Cole's reassurances, Faith found sleep elusive once more. The gravity of what lay ahead weighed heavily on her mind. She had come west seeking purpose and adventure, but not like this, not running for her life through territory she didn't understand. Dawn was just breaking when Cole gently knocked on the bedroom door to wake her. Faith dressed quickly in her borrowed clothes, pinning her hair up securely beneath a wide-brimmed hat Cole had provided. When she emerged, he was already loading supplies onto 2 horses, his own sturdy gelding, and a smaller mare he introduced as Willow. She's steady and sure-footed, Cole explained, helping Faith into the saddle. Perfect for mountain trails. Faith had ridden in Boston parks, but never for any real distance. She took the reins nervously, trying to recall her limited lessons. Just relax, Cole advised, adjusting her stirrups. Willow knows what she's doing, even if you don't. They set off as the sun crested the eastern mountains, heading northwest along a barely visible path that skirted the edge of Cole's property. Faith concentrated on maintaining her seat, grateful for the split skirt that allowed her to ride astride rather than sideways as she'd been taught. Cole led the way, occasionally glancing back to check on her progress. He seemed different today, more alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The rifle secured to his saddle was a reminder of the danger that had forced this journey. As the morning progressed, the terrain grew more challenging. They ascended into foothills covered with ponderosa pines, following game trails that sometimes seemed to disappear entirely. Yet Cole never hesitated, guiding them with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the landscape. "How do you know these paths so well?" Faith asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. "Spent my first 2 years out here trapping and hunting," Cole replied, handing her a canteen. "You learn the land or you don't survive." By midday, Faith's muscles were protesting the unaccustomed activity. When they stopped in a small clearing for lunch, she dismounted with a poorly suppressed groan, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. "It gets easier," Cole said, the hint of a smile touching his lips as he steadied her. "First day's always the worst." "I feel as though I've been drawn and quartered," Faith admitted, carefully lowering herself onto a fallen log. Cole chuckled, the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him, and the sound transformed his face, softening the lines and brightening his eyes. Faith found herself staring, struck by the sudden realization that he was quite handsome when not scowling or worried. "What?" he asked, noticing her gaze. "Nothing," Faith said quickly, accepting the jerky and hardtack he offered. "I'm just grateful for all of this." Cole shrugged, his usual reserve returning. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Faith said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have turned me away or worse, handed me over to those men." She met his eyes directly. "You risked yourself for a complete stranger. That's not common, Mr. Owens." "Cole," he corrected again, looking somewhat uncomfortable with her praise. "And you don't know that. Maybe I just don't like Chandler and his thugs." "Is that all it is?" Faith pressed. Cole busied himself with adjusting Willow's saddle. "We should keep moving. Want to reach the creek by nightfall." Faith recognized the deflection, but didn't push further. Instead, she rose with a wince and prepared to remount, accepting his assistance with as much dignity as her sore muscles allowed. They rode in companionable silence for much of the afternoon, the trail growing steeper as they ascended into the mountains. Faith gradually became more comfortable in the saddle, learning to move with Willow's rhythm rather than fighting against it. The sun was low in the sky when they reached the creek. Cole had mentioned a clear, swift running stream cutting through a small valley. Tall cottonwoods provided shelter, and the sound of the water created a soothing backdrop as they made camp. Cole efficiently unpacked their supplies while Faith gathered firewood, grateful for the chance to stretch her legs. By the time she returned with an armload of branches, he had cleared a space for the fire and was unsaddling the horses. "There's a pool just upstream that's good for washing," he said, nodding in the direction he meant. "Water's cold, but it'll help with the soreness." Faith thanked him and headed upstream, finding the pool he'd described a calm eddy where the creek widened slightly. Glancing back to ensure Cole was still busy with the camp, she removed her boots and rolled up her pant legs, then gingerly stepped into the water. The coldness was shocking at first, but as she adjusted, she had to admit it did soothe her aching muscles. She splashed water on her face and neck, washing away the dust of the trail. It was only when she heard a twig snap that she realized she was no longer alone. Faith whirled around, half expecting to see Cole. Instead, she found herself staring at a stranger, a rough-looking man with a scraggly beard and cold eyes. Behind him, 2 more men emerged from the trees. "Well, well," the first man said, his voice sending chills down Faith's spine. "What do we have here?" Faith backed away, her heart hammering in her chest. "Stay back," she warned, though her voice trembled. "My companion will be here any moment." The man laughed. "Your companion is a bit busy at the moment. My friends are making sure of that." The implications of his words filled Faith with dread. Had they attacked Cole? Was he hurt or worse? "What do you want?" she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Marcus Webb said there might be a reward for finding you," the man replied. "Said you were a troublemaker heading for Clearwater." "I'm just a schoolteacher," Faith said, desperately searching for a way past them. "Schoolteacher, huh?" The man stepped closer. "Well, educated ladies fetch an even better price in some quarters. Maybe we won't turn you in right away." Faith lunged to her right, trying to dart past him, but he was faster, grabbing her arm and yanking her back. She screamed, struggling against his grip, but he merely laughed at her efforts. "No one to hear you out here, miss." A gunshot cracked through the air, and the man's words cut off abruptly. He released Faith's arm, a look of surprise crossing his face as he crumpled to the ground. "There's someone to hear her." Cole's voice rang out, cold and hard. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his rifle aimed steadily at the remaining two men. "Next one's for whoever moves first." The men froze, clearly reassessing their situation. "We don't want trouble," one of them said, raising his hands slightly. "Should have thought of that before you followed us," Cole replied. "Now, drop your weapons." Slowly. The men complied, carefully placing their guns on the ground. "Faith, come here," Cole said, never taking his eyes off the intruders. Faith hurried to his side, trembling with reaction. "You two have a choice," Cole continued. "You can leave now without your guns, and I won't put bullets in you. Or you can try something stupid and end up like your friend there." The men exchanged glances, then began backing away. "Webb won't be happy," one of them warned. "Webb can join you if he wants to try his luck," Cole replied evenly. "Now go. And don't come back." They disappeared into the trees, and only then did Cole lower his rifle. Faith noticed a bleeding gash on his temple and a darkening bruise on his jaw. "You're hurt," she said, reaching up without thinking to touch the wound. Cole flinched slightly at her touch, but didn't pull away. "It's nothing. They tried to jump me while I was setting up camp. I dealt with it." "There were 3 of them," Faith said, suddenly understanding the enormity of what had happened. "You fought off 3 men?" "Only had to fight 2, Cole said with grim humor. "The 3rd one came looking for you." He glanced at the motionless figure by the creek. "I wasn't fast enough to stop him from finding you."
"I'm sorry."
"You saved my life," Faith said, her voice breaking. "Again." Cole's expression softened. "Are you all right?"
"Did he hurt you?"
Faith shook her head. "Just scared me." She looked back at the man Cole had shot, a wave of nausea washing over her. "Is he dead?" Cole confirmed. "And the world's better for it. That's Lyle Hardin. He's wanted in 3 territories for murder and worse." Faith swayed slightly, the events of the past few minutes catching up to her. Cole steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm.
"Come on," he said.
"Let's get back to camp. We'll move on at first light, find somewhere safer." That night, huddled close to the fire, Faith couldn't stop shaking. Not from cold, but from delayed shock and the growing realization of how dangerous their situation truly was. Cole sat beside her, cleaning his rifle with methodical movements. "How did they find us?" she asked finally. "Probably saw us leaving my ranch," Cole said. "Waited until we were far enough out that no one would hear gunshots, then made their move." He set the rifle aside. "We'll have to be more careful from now on. Change course, avoid the usual trails." "Will it take longer to reach Clearwater?"
"Yes."
"But better to arrive late than not at all." Faith drew her knees up to her chest, staring into the flames. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't come when you did." Cole was silent for a long moment. "But I did come," he said finally. And I won't let anything happen to you, Faith. I promise. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her heart beat faster. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Taking these risks for someone you don't even know? Cole poked at the fire, sending sparks swirling upward. I knew someone like you once, he said, his voice low. A woman who came west with dreams of making a difference. My sister, Martha. The one whose clothes I'm wearing? He nodded. When she first arrived in these territories, someone helped her, protected her when she needed it. He looked up, meeting Faith's gaze across the flames. I'm just passing on the favor. But Faith sensed there was more to it than that. Something in his eyes suggested a deeper motivation. Before she could press further, however, Cole stood up. You should try to get some sleep, he said. I'll take first watch. Faith wanted to protest that he needed rest too, especially after fighting off their attackers, but exhaustion was already tugging at her. She nodded and settled into her bedroll, watching as Cole positioned himself at the edge of their camp, rifle across his knees. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was his silhouette against the star-filled sky, a solitary guardian in the wilderness. The next 3 days passed in a blur of challenging terrain and constant vigilance. Cole altered their route, leading them through ravines and across rocky plateaus where they would be difficult to track. They traveled from dawn until dusk, making camp only when absolutely necessary, and even then, one of them always remained on watch. Despite the tension, Faith found herself growing stronger each day. The soreness in her muscles gradually faded, replaced by a new confidence in her ability to endure the rigors of the trail. She learned to help make and break camp efficiently, to spot the signs of water in seemingly barren landscapes, and even to shoot the revolver Cole insisted she carry. More surprisingly, she found herself growing increasingly comfortable with Cole himself. The initial awkwardness between them had given way to an easy companionship. During their brief rest periods, he taught her about the land and its inhabitants, sharing knowledge accumulated through years of frontier living. In return, Faith told him about her life in Boston, her education, and her dreams of teaching children who might otherwise never have the opportunity to learn. Cole listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed a sharp intellect beneath his taciturn exterior. Why teaching, he asked on their third evening, as they sat beside a small, carefully banked fire. Seems like a woman with your education could have chosen many paths. Faith considered the question. I had a teacher once, when I was very young. Mrs. Winters. My parents had died, and I was living with an aunt who... Well, she wasn't unkind, exactly, but she had little interest in children. She poked at the fire with a stick. Mrs. Winters saw something in me potential, I suppose. She gave me books, encouraged me to learn, to think for myself. She changed the course of my life. And now you want to do the same for others, Cole said, understanding in his voice. Faith nodded. A good teacher can transform a child's life. I want to be that person for someone. Cole was quiet for a moment. Clearwater's lucky to have you, he said finally. If we can get you there safely. We will, Faith said with more confidence than she felt. Thanks to you. Cole looked away, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. We should reach the outskirts of Clearwater by tomorrow afternoon, he said, changing the subject. But we can't just ride into town. Chandler's men will be watching for you. What do you suggest? We'll approach from the north, through Simpson's ranch. The owner, Jake, is a friend. He can get word to Sam Turner without attracting attention. Faith nodded, trusting his judgment. Then, gathering her courage, she asked the question that had been on her mind for days. What will you do, after you've delivered me to Clearwater? Cole hesitated, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Head back to my ranch, I suppose.
Oh.
Faith tried to hide her disappointment. Of course. Cole studied her, for a long moment. Unless. Faith echoed, her heart suddenly beating faster. But whatever Cole had been about to say remained unspoken as a distant sound caught his attention. He was on his feet in an instant, dousing their fire with dirt. "Someone's coming," he whispered, pulling Faith to her feet. "Multiple riders. We need to move." They quickly gathered their most essential supplies, leaving the rest behind as Cole led them away from their camp and into a dense thicket of junipers. They crouched low, listening as the riders drew nearer. "They can't have gone far," a voice called out, one Faith recognized with a chill as belonging to Marcus Webb, the man who had led the attack on the stagecoach. "The fire's still warm," another voice confirmed. "They're close." Faith pressed closer to Cole, fear tightening her throat. His arm went around her shoulders, steady and reassuring. "Split up," Webb ordered. "Check every ravine and hollow. The boss wants that girl found before she reaches Clearwater." The sound of hoofbeats scattered in different directions, some passing alarmingly close to their hiding place. Faith hardly dared to breathe, her face buried against Cole's chest. She could feel the rapid beating of his heart, the tension in his body as he held her protectively. Only when the sound had faded completely did Cole release her, though he remained alert, listening for any sign of the searchers' return. "They're gone for now," he whispered, "but they'll be back with daylight. We need to move." "But our horses, we'll have to leave them. Go on foot. It's our only chance." Faith's stomach clenched at the thought of abandoning Willow and Cole's faithful gelding, but she understood the necessity. The horses would make them too visible, too easily tracked in the open terrain ahead. Cole led the way, guiding Faith through the darkness with a woodsman's instinct. They moved as silently as possible, following the contours of the land to stay hidden. The moon provided just enough light to avoid obstacles, but not enough to betray their position to any watchers. Hours passed, and Faith's legs began to tremble with exhaustion. Just as she thought she couldn't take another step, Cole halted, pointing to a weathered structure barely visible in the pre-dawn light. "Simpson's old line cabin," he whispered. "We can rest there until daylight, then make for the main ranch." The cabin was little more than a single room with a dirt floor, but to Faith's weary eyes, it looked like salvation. Once inside, Cole secured the door with a heavy wooden bar, then sank down against the wall, clearly exhausted himself. "We made it," Faith said, her voice rough from hours of silence. "I can't believe we made it." Cole managed a tired smile. "Not quite to Clearwater yet, but close. Simpson's ranch is just over that ridge. Another few hours' walk." Faith settled beside him, her shoulder touching his. "I couldn't have done this without you, Cole. Not any of it." "You're stronger than you think," he replied. "You would have found a way." "No," Faith said firmly. "I wouldn't have. You saved my life multiple times." She turned to face him fully.
"Why?"
"And don't tell me it's just because someone once helped your sister."
"There's more to it than that."
"I can feel it." Cole was silent for so long that Faith thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed, his gaze fixed on the cabin's far wall. "My wife," he said softly. "Amanda. She was a lot like you, educated, idealistic, brave. She came west to teach, just like you." He paused, swallowing hard. "We met in Colorado. Got married. Decided to start a new life together in Arizona territory." Faith felt a chill of premonition. What happened to her? "Chandler's men," Cole said, his voice hardening. "Different territory, different mine, but the same tactics." She was organizing the women in town, teaching them to read so they could understand the mining company's contracts.
They didn't like that.
His hands clenched into fists. "One night, 3 men came to our cabin while I was out checking the livestock. By the time I got back..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Faith could see the old pain etched in his features, hear it in the roughness of his voice. "Cole, I'm so sorry," she whispered, reaching for his hand. He allowed the contact, his fingers gradually relaxing in her grip. It was 5 years ago. I tracked down 2 of the men responsible. The third Webb disappeared before I could find him. Understanding dawned. That's why you recognized him that first night. And why you're helping me. Cole nodded. When I saw you hiding in my barn, heard what you were running from. It was like seeing Amanda all over again. I couldn't just stand by. Not this time. Faith's heart ached for him, for the loss he'd suffered and the guilt he'd clearly been carrying. It wasn't your fault, she said gently. What happened to Amanda? I should have been there, Cole said, the words heavy with regret. Should have protected her. You can't know that you could have saved her, Faith countered. You might have died too. Maybe that would have been better.
No.
Faith tightened her grip on his hand. No, it wouldn't have been. Because then you wouldn't have been there to save me. She met his gaze directly. Your wife's death was a tragedy, Cole. But you've honored her memory by helping me by standing against the same kind of men who took her from you. Cole stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised his free hand to touch her cheek. You remind me of her, he admitted softly. But you're also
different.
Your own person, strong in your own way. The intensity in his eyes made Faith's breath catch. They were sitting very close now, their faces inches apart in the dim light of the cabin. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Cole, she whispered, hardly knowing what she meant to say. Before she could continue, a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Cole was on his feet instantly, gun drawn as he positioned himself between Faith and the entrance. Who's there? He called out, his voice steady despite the sudden tension. Jake Simpson, came the reply. That you in there, Cole? Cole's shoulders relaxed slightly, though he kept his gun ready as he approached the door. How'd you know I was here? Your horses showed up at my corral about an hour ago, Jake answered. Figured you might be holed up in one of the line cabins. You alone? Cole glanced back at Faith, who had risen to her feet, then carefully removed the bar and opened the door just enough to verify the visitor's identity. A weathered man in his 50s stood outside, rifle held loosely in his hands. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Faith. Well now, he said. Guess that explains the extra horse. You gonna introduce me to your lady friend, Cole? Jake Simpson, this is Faith Millington, Cole said, finally holstering his weapon. She's the new schoolteacher for Clearwater. Jake's expression turned serious. Been hearing rumors about a teacher. Chandler's men have been asking questions all over the territory. He studied Faith with new interest. You're the one they're hunting? Faith nodded. They attacked my stagecoach. Killed the other passengers. I managed to escape and found refuge at Mr. Owens' ranch. And now Chandler's thugs are after both of you, Jake surmised. Including Webb. You've seen him? Cole asked sharply. He was in town yesterday, offering $1,000 for information about a dangerous female fugitive. Jake spat on the ground. As if anyone with sense would believe that. We need to get Faith to Clearwater, Cole said.
To Sam Turner.
He's expecting her. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Not gonna be easy. Webb's got men watching all the roads into town. He glanced at Faith's exhausted face. But first, let's get you two back to the main house. You look like you could use some rest and a hot meal. They followed Jake to where he'd left his horse, taking turns riding while the others walked. By mid-morning, they reached the Simpson Ranch house, a substantial structure that spoke of years of successful cattle ranching. Mrs. Simpson, a kind-faced woman with graying hair, welcomed them warmly, immediately ushering Faith upstairs to a guest room where she could wash and rest. The simple luxury of clean water and a soft bed nearly undid Faith's composure, and she found herself fighting tears of gratitude. You've been through a terrible ordeal, dear, Mrs. Simpson said, patting her hand. You rest now. We'll figure everything out. Faith slept deeply for several hours, waking only when Mrs. Simpson gently shook her shoulder. "Supper's ready," the older woman said. "And Cole's been pacing the floor waiting for you to wake up." Faith dressed quickly in clean clothes. Mrs. Simpson had provided a simple skirt and blouse that fit reasonably well and made her way downstairs. She found Cole, Jake, and two other men deep in conversation around the dining table. Cole looked up as she entered, relief evident in his expression. "Faith," he said, rising to his feet. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," she replied, suddenly shy under the gaze of the strangers. "This is Sam Turner," Jake said, indicating a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard. "From Clearwater. And this is Sheriff Miller from Twin Pines." Faith shook hands with both men, surprised to find representatives from both towns in the Simpson home. "We've been discussing your situation, Miss Millington," Sam Turner said. "Clearwater still very much needs a teacher. But the circumstances have become complicated because of Chandler Mining," Faith said.
Sam nodded.
"They've grown bolder since Rebecca Holloway's death. And now with Webb offering rewards for your capture." He exchanged glances with the sheriff. "We're concerned for your safety, which is why we've come up with a plan," Sheriff Miller interjected. "But it depends on your willingness to take a risk." Over a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, they outlined their strategy. Faith would enter Clearwater openly, but not as Faith Millington. She would assume a new identity as a distant cousin of Mrs. Simpson's, come to visit family in the territory. Meanwhile, Sheriff Miller would spread word that the new schoolteacher had fled back east after the stagecoach attack. "Webb and his men will have no reason to connect you to the teacher they're hunting," Sam explained. "And once you're established in town, we can gradually introduce you as someone with teaching experience who might help with the school." "It means delaying your true purpose," Mrs. Simpson added gently. "But it also means staying alive." Faith considered the plan. It seemed sound, offering a way for her to reach Clearwater safely, while potentially confusing Chandler's men long enough for the territorial authorities to investigate the attacks. "I'll do it," she agreed. "Whatever it takes to get to Clearwater." Everyone seemed relieved by her decision, and the conversation turned to logistics: when she would travel, what documents would need to be created, how communication would be maintained. Throughout the discussion, Faith was acutely aware of Cole's silence. He participated when directly addressed, but otherwise remained withdrawn, his expression unreadable. When the meal concluded and the others moved to the parlor to finalize details, Faith found a moment to speak with him privately. "You're very quiet," she observed, joining him by the window where he stood looking out at the gathering dusk. "Just thinking," he replied. "About." Cole hesitated. "About what happens next."
"For you."
"For Clearwater." "What about for you?" Faith asked softly. He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intense. "I've been living half a life, Faith. Ever since Amanda died, I've just been existing, doing enough to get by, but not really living." Faith's heart beat faster at the raw honesty in his voice. "And now I've met someone who reminds me there's more to life than just survival." He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Someone worth fighting for. Worth living for." Faith felt tears prick her eyes. "Cole, I know it's sudden," he continued quickly. "I know we've only known each other a few days. But sometimes a few days can change everything." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking for promises. Just a chance to see what might be possible between us." Faith searched his face, seeing hope and vulnerability there, and something else, something that mirrored the growing feelings in her own heart. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." The relief and joy that transformed his features made Faith's breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Cole leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that nevertheless sent warmth spreading through her entire body. When they parted, Cole rested his forehead against hers. I'll be coming to Clearwater, he said. Often. To visit my family friend. Faith smiled, her heart lighter than it had been since leaving Boston. I'll look forward to those visits. A discreet cough from the doorway interrupted them. Sam Turner stood there, an apologetic expression on his face. Sorry to intrude, he said. But we need to finalize our departure plans. We'll leave at first light tomorrow. Cole nodded, reluctantly stepping back from Faith, though he kept hold of her hand. We'll be right there. As Sam withdrew, Faith looked up at Cole, suddenly uncertain. This planned means we'll be separated. What if it won't be for long? Cole assured her. Just until we're sure Webb has taken the bait. A few weeks at most. He touched her cheek gently. And then we'll have all the time in the world to see where this leads. Faith nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. Together, they joined the others in the parlor, their fingers intertwined in a promise neither had expected to make when Faith had first hidden in Cole's barn, crying for mercy in the darkness. 1 year later, Faith stood at the window of the Clearwater schoolhouse, watching as her students raced across the yard during their midday break. The school had flourished under her guidance, growing from 15 students to nearly 40 as families who had fled the Chandler Mining Company's intimidation gradually returned to town. Much had changed in the past year. The territorial governor, responding to pressure from Washington and evidence compiled by Sheriff Miller, had launched an investigation into Chandler's activities. Marcus Webb and several other company enforcers were now in prison awaiting trial, while the mining company itself faced financial ruin from legal challenges. Clearwater was thriving, its future secure at least for now. And Faith had found her place in the community, respected not just as a teacher, but as someone who had helped stand against corruption. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A familiar figure on horseback appeared on the road leading to the school, and Faith's heart leapt as it always did at the sight of Cole Owens. He dismounted gracefully, pausing to greet several of the children who ran to welcome him. In recent months, he had become a favorite visitor to the school, occasionally teaching the older boys about tracking, hunting, and respecting the land. Faith stepped onto the porch as he approached, unable to contain her smile. "You're early," she said. "I wasn't expecting you until this evening." Cole grinned, the expression transforming his once solemn face. "Couldn't wait," he admitted, closing the distance between them. "Not today." "Oh. And what's special about today?" Faith teased, though she knew perfectly well what day it was. 1 year ago today, Cole said, taking her hands in his, "A frightened young woman from Boston hid in my barn." His expression softened. "Best day of my life." Faith's throat tightened with emotion. "Mine too," she whispered, though I didn't know it at the time. Cole glanced around at the playing children, then back at Faith. "I was going to wait until tonight when we were alone, but—" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, dropping to one knee right there on the schoolhouse porch. "Faith Millington," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "You asked for mercy that night in the barn, and I said you had mine forever. I meant it then, and I mean it even more now." He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold ring. "I love you. Will you marry me?" Faith was aware of the children gathering to watch, of Sam Turner and other townspeople pausing in the street below. But in that moment, all she could see was Cole, the man who had saved her life, who had taught her about courage and second chances, who had shown her that love could be found in the most unexpected places. "Yes," she said, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, Cole Owens. I will marry you." As Cole slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her amidst cheers from students and townspeople alike, Faith knew that her journey west had brought her exactly where she was meant to be. Not just to Clearwater, but to this man, this life, this future that had begun the moment she had hidden in a stranger's barn, crying for mercy, and found forever instead.